will find me if you seek me with all your heart. This evening, we may hear some things that we may begin to challenge. Is this promise true? Can we really count on the Lord? Because we may hear some things that will challenge us and begin maybe to prompt us to think, well, this may hurt our ministries in the local congregation or the local school. It may harm us, but that's not God's intent. Even though we have regulations from the federal government and the state and policies, we will try to work together and let God triumph through this process. Because once again, He's wanting our ministries to succeed. I invite you to pause and let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that we have an opportunity to marvel at what you have done, what you are doing, and to begin to dream of what you might do in our local congregations, in our schools, in our community, in this area. And so we just pray that you would give us wisdom as we proceed this evening and in the days to come. In Jesus' name, amen. Some time ago, I sent out a memo to the pastors, the teachers, well, at least the principals. I think it also went to the elders, at least the head elder, the first elder, church treasurers. And it said something like this: significant changes are coming pertaining to employee remuneration and benefits. So we need to be working together. I had a number of pastors and some principals and teachers ask me following that, does that mean we're going to get another reduction in our pay? And the good news is, no, we're not planning for that. But we do have information that we want to share with you early on that will help you as you plan for your local church budgets and the school budgets as well. We have this evening, what we're going to be sharing with you is our conference, locally funded employee conversion. What we'll be discussing tonight will be actually quite similar to all of the conferences in North America, at least in the United States, I should say, coming down. So all the conferences are going to be implementing these changes. Some are specific to particular states. We'll talk a little bit about that. I do want to highlight that the word conversion for this evening, conversion is not a spiritual experience. Okay? We're not talking about an employee conversion. I know just here in this community, where is our pastor? He mentioned that they just finished a meeting with Taj, and they had 20-some baptisms, and I think 5 for one of our Asian congregations. We're not talking about that kind of conversion, but a changing process. Okay, one of the things that our attorneys, not just locally but throughout the division, they're telling us that all employees, whether they're stationed at your church or at your school or at your preschool, all employees are really employees of the conference. So that's one thing we need to be aware of. It doesn't matter where they're working, where they're assigned, they're still conference employees. And as long as each worker in each area is being treated the same throughout the conference, then that will meet our legal requirements. Why should a secretary who's working at the conference office building, who's working, let's say, full-time, have different benefits from the secretary who may be working full-time at the school or at the local church? That's it's not right. So we're trying to meet different requirements. This plan must facilitate your mission at the local church, your mission at the local school or preschool. It must be financially viable. We heard already some are saying, this might hurt us financially. We haven't thought we're going to have to plan and do something differently, perhaps. And that may be, but we don't want to damage, and we don't want to say that, that with these proposed changes, these coming changes, that you have to implement them at the financial damage of your mission. We must do the right thing for our employees, not just legally. Yes, we do want to fulfill legal requirements, but we're probably more concerned about the moral imperative of doing the right thing, treating our employees fairly. So who or what are locally funded employees? We mentioned they're employees of the conference. They're eligible for remuneration, which is a word we can say is pay. It's another word that would be equated to remunerate their pay. And benefits based on their classifications. And Pastor Steenberg will talk a little bit more about these classifications, but let me just highlight some of the classifications. One is exempt. We normally use the word they're salaried individuals. Okay? Another classification is non-exempt. The government uses that term, which we commonly refer to as hourly. I'll just put a little word in here. Chances are for most churches and most schools, and even sometimes within the conference, that many people we have classified as salaried or exempt, chances are that's a misclassification and they may be needed to be reclassified as hourly. We'll talk once again, Pastor Steenberg will talk a little bit about that. And then another distinction is full-time or part-time. Each employee is they're subjects to the conference policy, rules, and procedures. They're covered by federal and state employment laws in the same manner as regular status employees. Once again, feel free if you do have some questions, to raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you, because we want to make sure that you're getting the information that's helpful to you. One classification that we need to let you know is teachers. Teachers by federal law have been declared as exempt, even if you're only teaching one class period. That doesn't mean the rest of you things that you do throughout your life is exempt, but at least for that job, you're considered exempt. Pastors can be either full-time or part-time. The job functions need to be determined by the conference. And if you're locally funding a pastor, we'll want to get your insights of what you would like this pastor to do, what your job expectations are as we negotiate with that. Pastor Steenberg and I are trying to make sure that we're consistent so that we don't have someone that we're only paying for part-time but expecting them to work full-time. That's inconsistent. We'll talk a little bit more about that as time goes on. For our conference, the conference recently has defined full-time work for non-exempt or hourly employees. It's at least 38 hours per week. Now that doesn't mean that if you work 34 hours one week, you lose your benefits, by no means. It's just on a regular basis, is the job that you're performing expected to take 38 hours? And for most weeks, are you working 38 hours or more? That would be full-time for hourly individuals, non-exempt. Exempt, the definition is 100, because the software that we have for payroll for the North American division has two categories. There's a time factor and a wage factor. The time factor must be at 100%, meaning we're expecting the employee to work at least 38 hours a week on average. And then the wage factor needs to be 75% or greater of the Central California Conference wage factor. And then once again, full-time or part-time classification will impact the local church or the school in terms of its eligibility, as well as the conference too. Full-time status, obviously, would include greater benefit eligibility. And The employee benefits for those that are locally funded would be the responsibility of the local agency, meaning the local church or the local school or the local preschool. Now, one of the things happening too, we said that all employees of the conference, are truly conference employees. If someone is working half-time at Foothill School in Milpitas, but yet working half-time for Mountain View Academy, we have been treating that as two separate, I'll say, employees, and they're not qualified. Beginning July 1, when we roll this program and officially have it implemented, that no longer exists. They can certainly work half-time and half-time, but then they would be eligible if they qualify for full-time for those benefits. So that's something that we need to be planning for. And once again, in an area like this, that's something you'll want to be mindful of.
Pastor?
Yes?
Would at that time the schools be sharing the benefits?
That's a good question. We have, as a conference, we've not decided yet how that will be implemented. Some of our, I'll say, officers or administrators advocate for the first come, first serve, meaning that whoever employed them first wouldn't have to pay for the benefits. Others are leaning towards sharing them proportionately. And I can't predict which one will win, but my guess is probably the latter. So if someone's working 60% and 40%, then they would bear those costs proportionately. Good question, thank you. And as I mentioned, the effective date for implementation is July 1, 2013. We're wanting to give you information in advance so you can begin, because particularly with schools generally start planning their budget for the following school year in about January, February. Is that for our educators, is that right? Okay. So that means that information will need to be shared with these schools and preschools way in advance so they will know their costs. And that's why we also decided to have it start in July, so that it would not interfere with a school's financial calendar on that. Remuneration. Hourly positions at the conference and local level are to be compensated at community wages except for Bible workers. The NAD is challenging us to meet this imperative, not just what we think we can afford, or not just minimum wage, but I'll share with you at least one site. We've already received earlier today another site, internet site that you can go to see what the local wages, I'll say the spectrum would be for that position. For instance, with secretaries, there are different classifications of secretaries. So you would choose at the school or at the local church what level you would want and need the secretary to perform in terms of the criteria for work, and then be paid accordingly. Those who might be on the denominational wage scale for hourly employees will be frozen until the local rates catch up. That's assuming that they're already being paid more than the local community wage. So if they're not, once again, we will need to meet the criteria for the local community wages. And this is for hourly individuals. Here's one resource, and we just received an earlier one today, so I don't have it on my slide, but we will share that with you. And that's salary.com. You go in and you punch in your zip code, and it'll tell you for this position, this is what's being paid in your community. It doesn't have just one figure. It has kind of like this is where it starts, and here is where most people are, and then here's the high end of the spectrum for that position. Other issues of concern. If you're providing a benefit to the employee, One example is housing for Bible workers. Most churches have not been treating that as a taxable benefit, but our attorneys are telling us we should be looking at it as a taxable benefit if you're providing housing for your Bible worker. And we'll share perhaps a little bit more about that too. One way to do that, once again, would be to issue a 1099. Another way to treat this would be you would pay the employee more and then have that employee pay the church rent. Those are just things to consider. Another thing to be mindful of, if you have an employee that's also serving in the church board or has another function or another event, and it's closely related to their employment, chances are we need to be paying them for that. And I'll just give an illustration here. If you are paying your church treasurer, and you are requiring or expecting your church treasurer to come to the board meeting and present financial reports, at least for that aspect of the meeting, and if you're requiring them or expecting them to be there, then they need to be paid because it's part of their work. When I was pastoring in Modesto, I had to be careful because our church secretary would be asked to do so many things. Now, obviously, if it's once in a great while where they're asked, can you photocopy this page for me? It's Sabbath morning for one of the, not for me as a pastor, but for one of the departmental, Sabbath school leaders. Okay, but if it's an ongoing thing, if it's participating in something that would be similar to her paid work, they need to be compensated. It would be work. There are some issues that the General Conference legal counsel is searching for a further clarification from the Internal Revenue Service. Stipend workers, summer camp workers, and task force workers. Perhaps the safest thing that I can share with you would be, at this point in time, don't plan on using the category for a stipend individual. It's safer for you, for your planning, for your school, and for your church, not to think, well, we have hired our church custodian, and we're saying we'll pay you $200 a month to clean the whole church and the Sabbath school rooms or whatever, and leave it at that. We probably need to be treating that individual as an hourly employee. So we don't have an official ruling yet, but they have been telling us in our various training seminars and workshops that the safest thing at this point in time is don't bank on the category of stipend workers. And once again, when we get official word from IRS and from the General Conference attorneys, we'll let you know on those.
Is that the same for task force workers?
Yes, and we're working through that. Just this week, Pierre and I had a question about one of our schools. Is this task force? Is this not? And according to the information that I have looked at, the task force category actually is a task force volunteer position. And then we have been treating it as a stipend for the most part. Well, for the volunteer part, that's not an issue because they're not paid. But the other one, and so it's hard to say, Pastor Colon, we're working with that. We don't have a definitive answer, but that would be something that we're working on. Yes?
Along, I guess, the same line to do with, if the secretary, copies things for the church board during her secretarial hours,
Right.
yes, of course, that's paid for.
Right.
But other stuff, can't she consider it, or he, as though it's volunteer time? Do they have to be paid?
The simple answer to that is yes to the last one, no to the previous one. They must be paid, and they cannot volunteer. If it's closely related to their normal scope of work.
That they're employed